Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining in for the second part of this webinar today. My name is Benjamin Schlesinger. I'm at the Australian National University. And today we're going to talk about how does the sequence make it or break it, how to succeed in science startups and entrepreneurship in academia or after you left academia. So the webinar is really hosted by eLife. And the series aims to give early career researchers a platform to discuss issues important to you and your research. Today's speakers will discuss entrepreneurship in science and academia and beyond. The webinar will begin with the panelists sharing their stories. In the second half of the webinar, we will be putting your questions to them. All right, here we go. So the webinar is really presented by the Early Career Advisory Group, which is a group within eLife which represents early career researchers and their interests. Yeah, for questions, you can type the questions either in the GoToWebinar box in the functions panels, or you can tweet to us, which is at eLife community using the hashtag #ECRWednesday. Finally, I would just like to let you know that we are recording this webinar and we will make it available to you on YouTube in the near future. Okay, first of all, I would really like to thank all the panelists who take the time for us today to talk with us. As I said, I'm Benjamin. I'm from National University. I work on genomes and plants and fungi and how they interact. But today we're not to talk about science startup and entrepreneurship with a really vast panel from some people who have their own startups in the US, from people who work in startups also in the US, and people from Europe. We also have been very successful in science entrepreneurship. So I think it will be a really exciting discussion, and it will also lead on to a discussion we had earlier today, covering some more aspects from people in Europe and Australia, and maybe we try to elucidate how working in startups or doing entrepreneurship is different in different parts of the world. But for now, without further ado, all of the panelists will briefly talk about why they are where they are. And I would like to kick this off with Dr. Sally Cotmore, who manages a research institute in Ireland called ABC Microbiome Ireland, and she will talk you more about what she's doing. Thank you, Sally. Oh, you have to switch on your microphone again.
Can you hear me now? No. Yes, okay, grand. Excellent. Thank you very much, Benjamin, for that introduction. And it's lovely to join you this afternoon. Even though I am based in Ireland, I'm actually dialing in today from Brussels, where I'm over with the European Commission at a series of research and innovation days, which has been very exciting so far. So it's nice to take time out of that and have an opportunity to talk to maybe some of the early career researchers who are considering a potential future career in an area like a startup company. So I suppose I'll take it back a couple of years to maybe where I got involved. So in about 2012, the research institute that I was involved in, APC Microbiome Ireland, we saw an opportunity for a business that could provide clinical trials to the food industry. And the main reason for that is that the legislation in Europe had recently changed, which meant that any company that wanted to make a health claim in relation to a food product, so for example, it could be a probiotic yogurt, or it could be an ingredient that a company wanted to prove had cardiovascular benefits, in order to be able to make that claim on the packaging of the food product, you had to do a series of clinical trials and submit that research to the European Food Safety Authority, called EFSA, and then they decided whether there was sufficient evidence to prove that health claim. So essentially what was happening is that the food industry was moving a little bit closer to what the pharmaceutical companies had been doing to prove the benefits of drugs. So because the legislation changed and because food companies didn't know how to do clinical trials, we saw an opportunity and we spun out a company called Atlantia Food Clinical Trials in that space. So that really, I suppose, is how I ended up in that area. Initially, for about 3 years, I had a part-time role still managing the research institute in the university, and a part-time role as the CEO of this company as it became established. So we've been asked, I suppose, what are the differences between academia and between something like this in a startup company. And I suppose probably the main difference, at least initially when you are involved in setting up a startup company, is you have to be able to do many different roles. So I went from a situation, I suppose, where I was much more specifically involved in research to suddenly a situation whereby I was talking to customers, I was talking to legal people, I was helping to sign contracts and come up with contracts, involved in finance, negotiating to try and rent space, for example, hiring people. So you go from a situation whereby you're much more specifically focused in one area, typically your research, into having to very quickly become somebody who can juggle a lot of different types of activities. And there will be a lot of firefighting along the way. There will be problems. And I suppose you need to have this sort of ability to think about a problem and to try and come up with a solution. It may not always be the right solution. You'll discover that maybe later on in the journey, but it is the ability to just simply make a decision and go with that decision and hope that it is the right decision. So there will be lots and lots of learning along the way. It's a very exciting opportunity. It's something you should really be passionate about, because you will find that you will eat, sleep, dream your startup company particularly over that initial period where you're trying to get it all up and running. So it's something you really need to passionately believe in it. You need to love what you're doing, because if you don't, you will probably find that it will start to drag you down a little bit. You're going to have to commit time. If you're lucky and you have a supportive university environment, they might be willing to give you time. So in our University College Cork, in my situation, I was allowed to be seconded into the startup company 3 days a week. Again, in our situation, then the startup company pays the university back from my time. Some of the other academics in our university are able to put in place a situation with the university whereby they can take 20% of their time and use that initially to start up the company. So I think one of the critical ingredients for success, particularly in the very initial stages when you're trying to start this up, is having a supportive university environment. Some universities may not be as used to doing this as others. Certainly in our context in Ireland, there certainly had not been the same emphasis on startup companies as many other countries would have had. So our startup company was probably one of the few to go through this system. And in particular, where we were maybe a little bit different to many other startup companies is that we were a service company. So instead of having a specific piece of intellectual property and developing a product, what we were rolling out, our customer offering, was essentially a service. And certainly it was the first time that our university had dealt with spinning out a service company. So when it came to trying to license intellectual property, licensing, for example, know-how, that was all a little bit different in our context. So I suppose I don't want to take up too much of the initial time, but I would stress here again, you need to be passionate. You need to surround yourself with really good people who have a complementary set of skills, and just go for it. It's a great opportunity, and there's always an opportunity, if it doesn't work out, to possibly come back into the academic system a couple of years later. But I never regret doing it, and I would encourage anybody who has an opportunity to try. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Sally, for this precise and very encouraging pitch. It nearly came down to the elevator pitch of a startup. So that was really great. Let's lead into Ivan, because I think he's also very passionate about his company, and it kind of connects a little bit of the technology Ivan is selling with microbiomes. So Ivan is the inventor of a core technology which applies proximity ligation to metagenome deconvolution and other genomic aspects, but he can tell you better than I do what he's actually on about.
Thank you, Benjamin. Can you guys hear me? Are we good? Okay. Thanks. So yeah, this is actually a fortuitous week to have me on. A couple of days ago, we hosted a startup symposium in Seattle. So I'm calling from Seattle on the west coast of the United States, where we brought basically 6 founders, kind of like here, to tell sort of like their stories. So if you guys are interested in hearing like longer versions of these, I'm gonna try to make sure we did a live stream. I'm pretty sure that they're going to be recorded and posted on the website. So if you're interested, contact me later. I think a lot of the things that I'm going to say are going to be very similar to what Dr. Gudmore said. So I was a postdoc at the University of Washington in Seattle, and sort of towards the end of, it was a long postdoc. Kind of at the end, we had this sort of idea around using this technology in a specific way, and we started. We engaged in a lot of academic collaborations with different labs, and then it's sort of this technology we had, proximity ligation. It was just really transformative in the genome assembly space, in the microbiome space. We were doing all this discovery, and it became clear at some point that the academic framework wasn't sort of robust enough to turn this into something that could actually go forth and sort of change the scientific community. And we just decided we had to turn this into a product. So I teamed up with a friend of mine. So this is sort of an interesting tidbit as well, because we're coming out of academia. We're used to think everybody has to come out of academia to do this. My co-founder actually was not a scientist by training. He was a software engineer at Microsoft for a long time, and so he took a huge risk and left that job. Taking massive pay cuts and all that stuff. And we sort of formed the company as a 2-man team. Another fun fact, we actually knew each other personally, because we played Dungeons and Dragons in my house 4 years before then. And so that's kind of the reality of startups. People think there are these fancy high-tech things, but a lot of times it's really a garage project between friends in the beginning. And just like Sally said, in the beginning, you're doing everything. We were 2 guys in a closet, like a literal closet in a biotech incubator on campus. And, you do everything. You do accounting, you do science, you do software, you do like all the stuff. One of the things that I really loved about it was the fact that, and I would tell this to people all the time, because I still had a little bit of my, like, one foot in the academic, there was a long time where I was sort of part-time between academia and the company. And I would tell my academic colleagues where I was just like, this is the most learning intense period of my life. Like, I've been a scientist since I was 16 years old. But this time, like, I'm learning stuff, like just stuff that I never even heard of before. It's not hard. Like, science is generally harder than business, but just the things that you learn are so different. It's about how to deal with people. It's about how to negotiate stuff over money. It's about how to think about products and in a way that's not just technology focused. So one of the things that I really had to learn is how to think about these things from the end backwards. And so instead of so think about what you're trying to accomplish, and then everything you do is just a way to get there. And that's sort of the opposite of how I've always learned things. It's just like you just keep going forward. You do the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and without kind of like a final plan, final goal in mind. And I think, as Sally mentioned, the first most important interactions are going to be with your university. Different companies have different ethics. Like, so I'm in Seattle, which is on the west coast of the United States, and the folks in Seattle are always, like, the business folks are always complaining about why is Seattle not a biotech hub like the San Francisco area is, etc. And a lot of it has to do with attitudes. And so some areas are, kind of like more into startups. Other areas don't think about it as much. And one of the things we've been trying to do locally is to try to stimulate more kind of commercialization thinking. A lot of it comes down to having your peers support each other. So surround yourself with with mentors, maybe somebody who has done it, just to bounce ideas, to give yourself a little bit of encouragement and courage. And this is why people go out for coffee all the time in business, like, because a lot of what you're doing is you're sort of you're going through uncharted waters. and you need people to sort of provide you with support emotionally. Like emotions are more important than you would think. We're used to doing science. We're used to thinking it's all about data and technology, but actually how you feel and how you get along with people is extremely important, because you're going to be bringing teams together, right? You have to find the right people to complement your skills. Like, I'm pretty good at certain things, but I'm like terrible at other things. And so I needed a co-founder who was kind of like the flip side of myself. Somebody, you know, who can read a 10-page contract and not like pass out, you know, things like that. And so think about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Think about what you need in order to accomplish those things. What kind of people do I need? What are they going to be doing? You know, how much money do I need? Like, we bootstrap, so we actually don't have a lot of investor money. Most of our money comes from revenue. We also started primarily as a service company, because it's a good way to kind of like get a little bit of money going without having to go to investors and do the whole like venture capitalist rigmarole. And so, yeah, so think about what you're actually trying to build. Talk to the people who might be interested, like, will they actually pay you money for this if you build it, right? And then move to there. So say, like, I need these people. Where do I find them? Like, I need a software developer. How do I get a software developer to leave a high-paying job at Microsoft or Amazon and work for this like brand new startup? Like, what do I have that will convince people to come and join my team? How do I keep them producing a product or a service that's useful, you know, to people, and people actually, you know, pay money for it? And how to grow, and then you grow the team as you kind of as the wheel starts spinning and you start selling things and you start moving forward. You bring on more people, seek out grant funding wherever you can. I mean, that's still money that, you know, the science community still has access to in some cases, you know. So try to do whatever you can, but always keep the final goal in mind. Like, what are we actually trying to do here? You know, a lot of people start startups because maybe they're tired of what they're doing before. A lot of people say, I just want to start a company. That's actually a little bit of a dangerous path. What you really need is, you need to have a goal, you need to have a vision, like, this is what I'm trying to do, and the company is a means to the end, to that end. If you're just trying to start a company and you don't know why, it's going to be much harder. And so think about these things. Think about the end first and how to get there. But I also agree with Sally. This is, you know, it's a super rewarding experience. It's the most learning rich experience you will ever have. It's frustrating and it's scary, you know, and it requires you to really get out of your comfort zone. A lot of people worry about, like, what are my academic colleagues going to think about me, that I've done this, and so there's an emotional barrier to overcome there as well. I think most people, like, it's not actually a problem. You just feel like it's a problem. You're worried about it, but in general, I think it's really a life-changing kind of a thing. So I'm over my time, so I'll take questions later.
Cool, thank you, Ivan. I think you both also touched a little bit on what we had this morning, so which was a lot about that you really have to go out and talk with people, and while you talk with people that you're going to learn, and that you maybe have to also then refine, and it's really about the value and the market, because you actually you have to sell a product. So that's actually connect very nicely to this morning too. But for now, we're going to go on next to slightly different side, so to Nicholas Thomas, Dr. Nicholas Thomas. He's a graduate from Boston University. He worked at different places at UC, at the University of California, and Davis and Riverside, and he's currently an employee at a startup. So a slightly different perspective, which we'll hear now about. Thank you, Chris. Nick.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so like Ben said, I am an employee, but I'm the first primary employee, so I kind of work as the number two. So I've been involved in a lot of the project management on the science side. So a lot of that is very painfully similar to academia and like a standard academic postdoc, but also on the business development side. And so I'll go ahead and echo some of those points Sally and Ivan made with that you have to talk to people. You have to understand your market. And actually one of our sources of funding was an NSF grant, an SBIR grant. And so as part of receiving that funding, we're required to talk to people doing what they call customer interviews. And what we discovered was that our market wasn't really there. So I think in hindsight, what would have been really useful for us, even before starting a company, getting funding or anything like that, is to know your market. And don't try and lead people into the answers that you want, but really ask them or who you think your end user is going to be. What are your problems, and you know, what kinds of things are you looking for? And if they're hitting those things without you leading into that, then you probably are on the right track. And if not, then you're probably not. I think, yeah, I also very much agreed with getting different sources of funding. So we've gotten all sorts of different kinds of funding, including grants and partnerships with other companies. But we've also been kind of strategic about that. I don't know if anybody's mentioned that, but we haven't really. We've been presented with a few opportunities of some sizable funding, but we thought, you know what, we really can't address those problems. So we actually decided not to go into those partnerships because we didn't want to get all this funding and then not be able to deliver. But I'm not sure, maybe the other panelists have a different thought on that. Yeah, so our company focuses on actually mobilizing a lot of academic related research into the field, literally the field. So we work on plant immune receptors and trying to utilize those in crop species. But I actually maybe wanted to focus more on these later questions that we were presented with about what it's like to work in a startup. And I think one of the main differences, at least for me, compared to academia, so I left academia pretty readily after a 2-year postdoc, which didn't seem very rewarding for me, at least. And when I first started, I realized right away that the biggest difference is that everybody has to buy in. And that was not true with academia, even with my mentor, who flat out told me, you know, it doesn't really bother me if one of my postdocs doesn't do well. I have 5 others, right? So you're on your own as a postdoc, basically. But at a startup, like Sally said, everybody's dreaming about it, eating, sleeping. All of it revolves around what you're doing for this company, because you want to buy into it and you want to be part of the culture. And I think with that, it's also important to like who you're working with there. And I do, so that's good so far. I think a lot of these business development opportunities has really helped develop some of the soft skills that were I think I was developing, and other academics do develop as part of their training in academia, but are maybe more emphasized here with talking with people, understanding what markets are, like Ivan mentioned, you know, learning business outside of business school, which isn't hard. It's just a new world, but it's an interesting and important way of thinking, of course, if you're going to be part of a business startup. And I think from that, one of these questions I really liked, it said, will you ever stop being a scientist? And I thought, you know what, I don't see why not, given especially what I've learned from being at a startup. I think a lot of these soft skills are really important to develop, and being at a startup has really helped me. So even if you're not thinking about staying with that particular startup, and if you're not entirely vested in it, if you're just thinking about joining one, helping out, and moving on, then I think it is a really good opportunity to develop some of these skills, and because they're very transferable. I've already been approached by several other people asking if I would be interested, and I'm failing to see why not every day, but still enjoying my time here at the startup. But yeah, and if anybody's interested in specifically what the company I'm with is doing specifically, I'd be happy to answer that. But I just thought it'd be good to touch up, address some of those other questions that weren't brought up yet.
Cool, thank you, Nick. It's definitely a different perspective from what we had before. So last but not least, it's Dr. Joanne Kames. She's just on the phone with us for now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, take it away.
So hi, this is Joanne. I'm trying to get into the audio, but I think it's a little complicated because I'm on my phone in my office at the same time. So hold on, let me see if I can. All right, well, I'll just start by talking and I'll try and get onto the video once we get going. Sorry, everybody. I just got off a train from New York. One of the fun things about Startup Land is business development can take place in a lot of places. So, you know, that part is fun. So I actually am not a founder of a startup. I came right directly from graduate school to 15 years in big pharma. And then my second job in science was at an RNAi startup called RXI. I was about employee 16 and I was hired to build the research team. So that was a super fun environment. It was founded by one of the founders was Craig Mello, the Nobel Prize winner in RNAi. He had just won the Nobel Prize, so it was a really hot area. I just want to echo all the things that the other speakers talked about. How much fun, how much learning there is, how it's pretty much constant learning. You know, that's kind of the nature of Startup Land. I mean, I think you can learn a lot in graduate school, but I think you learn a lot more in life, fortunately, because life is a lot longer than school. So, so when I was at RXI, halfway through my time, I'm a biologist, I'm a molecular geneticist, and the work became very chemical, and I'm not a chemist. So I moved into the business development group to help do pitching, to help raise money. We were a traditional venture capital drug discovery organization. The company still exists. We have a drug in the clinic that I worked on way back when, about 15 years or 10 years ago, 11 years ago. I loved every minute of it. It was a super fast ride. It was 4 years. Drug discovery startups tend to have a lot of money and a little time, so things are incredibly fast and high paced. Constant learning. I think all three of the other speakers, Sally, Nick, and Ivan, all talked about how you're learning every day, every minute. And I think that's what makes us scientists. We're sort of lifelong learners in a way. And so then after 4 years, we did not get pharma funding. And so we took a drug into development with venture money. And so the entire research staff was laid off, including myself. So, and that's when I started at Adgene. And Adgene is a different type of startup. We're not such a startup anymore because we're about 100 people. But Adgene was a startup started by Melina Fan, who was a graduate student at the time, her husband, who's a software coder, and her brother, who's a financial person. And the three of them started Adgene about 15 years ago, right, while they were still in school. And I came in at about year 8 of Adgene. Or not quite year 8, I've been at 8, so year 7, I've been at Adgene for about 8 years. And since then, we've grown from about 15 people to about 100 people. Adgene is also a service nonprofit. We have products, but we are a service to the scientific community to make materials open and shareable. So we help scientists share plasmids, that's what we do. You know, as part of that's how we fund our mission. We don't have any grants or venture money. We have an occasional donation when people really see the value of what we do. They want to get involved and help us out, and mostly for capital. So we ensure that as a startup, we can run our company. We're sustainable without investment, but sometimes to start up a new business, we'll have donations to help us with the capital for those projects. That's, I guess, what I would maybe want to talk more about and hopefully answer questions, since I'm pretty far in my career. I've been in science for 35 some years now. Is, you know, more about what you can do while you're training to start getting involved in the startup scene. And I agree, you know, Seattle has a pretty lively startup scene, and even Belgium has a really good startup scene, in Ireland and all these places. I would say Boston is pretty much one of the most amazing places in the world to do startup. And so I'd be happy to answer questions about what you can do while you're training to get involved in that.
Cool, thank you very much, Joanne. That was very on the point too. So the thing which I picked up, which we also talked a little bit about this morning, was about community, and Ivan, I think, stressed this quite heavily, and also like Joanne, we just finished. So that it's really important actually to kind of be in a community of people who actually did something like this, or had the same learning experience. So I would like to touch on this a little more. So for people to explain this, like how they actually got mentors and how they actually got into being successful so far, at least, in running their startups, and how they connected with the whole community. Maybe Ivan, you can pick it up because you were in this other event earlier this week, and then we can just go around and other people can pitch in.
Sure. So, so I think how to be successful in terms of kind of like the business and the science. You know, a lot of that is you're doing work. You're you're kind of like keeping your fingers crossed that things work out. A lot of the success comes especially in the early days, comes from thinking about, like, I mean, this may sound kind of I don't know, cliche or something, but thinking about other people first. And so you're thinking about, you know, your earliest customers, like how can you help them, and you kind of like pour out some of that energy. Your early team members, like you really want to get the good ones. You know, you have to be sort of going out heartfelt. You're talking to people all the time, and you're just constantly looking for opportunities and looking for things to do. And usually, you know, things like when you ask somebody for help, like they will help you. So talk to like your tech transfer office at the university, and just like don't leave them alone. Like nag them for, like, just keep going back and being like, I need this, I need that. What do I get this? Where, you know, like can you set me up with this person? Can you introduce me to this person? You know, like just email random people you've never met, being like, hey, can I like I have some questions. Can you know, like one of the things I tell people, if you ever want somebody to help you, just say things like, I'm trying to learn X. Can you help me? Can I just talk to you about it? Like as long as you approach problems from that perspective, people will help you. And so and so a lot of it stems from that, from just trying to get people sort of like forming good relationships with founders, with employees, with customers. People, like, sometimes, like, even if like you're doing these projects in the very beginning, you don't even know if things are going to go right. It's a two-way conversation. But if you're in it and you're really trying, you're the person on the other side, your partner, your customer, like, even if things don't work out well, if you have a good relationship and they think that you're doing the best, and there's like a give and take, like, they will forgive you. Like, they'll pay you money, and they'll, you know, so really it's about human to human interaction, and how we formed this community of startups. Like, honestly, like, they were just all people I knew, right? Like, so we had 6 startup founders give presentations earlier this week, and you know, it was all people who came out of the department, who I knew. We grabbed coffee periodically once in a while, and you start, little by little, you start forming this network of connectivity. You know, if you're like in a place like Boston, I was just there a few days ago, like, yes, there's like 1 million startups, and they, you know, like, there's nodes, like there's groups of them like working together. Like, that's the kind of thing we're trying to build in Seattle. But that's really at the heart of it. Like, it's just people like working together and bouncing ideas off each other, and it's friends, and it's informal, you know, and that sort of thing.
Thank you. So, Joanne, do you want to maybe add to this? Because you said you could give some tips of actually for ECRs and how to get involved in startups, or how to learn more about them, maybe, and also be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, fortunately, I mean, y'all have the internet, and it's a vast and wonderful resource. So I didn't have that for my first job. So I think the first thing is I think every single person who's anywhere in any science career will tell you that it's all about knowing people. Both of my jobs, and startups in particular, because startups are very dependent on personalities. Like, in a big company, if there's a person you don't like working with, you just avoid that person. But if you're 5 people and one person is sort of poisonous or hard to get along with, or doesn't collaborate well, it can ruin the company, and it can be really miserable. So startup founders are really careful about surrounding themselves with people. They should be careful with people that can make a collegial working environment, because it's a lot of pressure, right? So in that case, what do people want to do? They want to hire people they know. They don't want cold resumes. They want to go for people that they can trust are not going to be crazy, difficult, make them unhappy. And so both my job at Adgene and the job at RXI, those jobs were never advertised. There would have been no way to know about them if I didn't know people. And so I guess, and every panel I'm at, every career conference I speak at, it's knowing people that gives you unusual and cool opportunities. When I was looking for a job when I got laid off, I didn't even know about Adgene because I was in industry, and at the time, Adgene didn't have much to do with industrial scientists. And so I didn't really know about it, but I knew the founder because through a Women in Science group. And I actually knew a number of the board members because I had worked with them or done something with them at something in Boston, so half of the board were people known to me. And it's not the job I was looking for. I was looking for an alliance management job in a middle-sized pharmaceutical biotech drug discovery. But instead, I get to be at Adgene, which is an incredibly amazing nonprofit. So I guess the thing to do to get ready is to expose yourself to people who are doing startups. And I agree, someone on the panel said, people like to talk about it. They like to help. They want to give advice, and they want to tell you about their experiences. And each of their job stories is different, how they got where they are, and they're all valuable because you will find with startups that it's always something unique. It's some unique Dungeons and Dragons game, or it's some unique opportunity in the lab, something that you knew. So I know it really sounds trite, but it really is about getting out there and meeting people. And if you're in a place where the startup scene isn't lively, most universities have some kind of incubator at this point, some kind of work. Then, I would urge you to go online, go to conferences, look for people that are doing things that you're interested in and just talk with them. And you can't do that when you need a job, you have to do it before. Because if you do it when you need a job, it's sort of too late. It has to be a thing that you're doing along the way.
Cool. That's good advice. I think it's so important to talk with people all the time anyway. And that came up also really this morning that, talk with people and get the input, like kind of mix the input to actually also for your product development. That was something which was touched on before. Dr. Sally Kudrum, do you want to add something from maybe your SPEEN perspective? Is it slightly different or is it the same flavor in Europe? The microphone.
I would definitely echo what the previous speakers have said. I think the first most important point is don't be afraid to ask for help. You're not going to know how to do this. There are going to be aspects to startup companies.
I think you muted again, Sally.
Yeah, it's echoing here, but can you hear me again now?
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay. Make sure, don't be afraid to ask for help because there will be aspects of this that you will never have come across before. And so it's important, in addition to surrounding yourself by really good people on the team, people who've got complementary skill sets. One of the things that I was lucky to have when I started off in this was a good business mentor. So while I had the research and the technical background, I maybe was not as strong in areas such as being brave enough to go to people I had never known before and asking them to put me in contact with potential customers. So having a business mentor that you can bounce ideas off, that you can go to when you're having a bad day and saying, oh gosh, what do I do next? Somebody who'd give you advice, I think that's very important. The other thing which we did as well reasonably early on is we set up a board. Because again, when you've got a small startup team, and for us for the first year, we had a team of about 3 or 4 people, we're not going to have all of that big skill set. So establishing a board at some stage reasonably early on that can help you with connections either into potential customers or into funding sources or into media if you want to try and get publicity out there, people maybe who know social media. So if you have a board of people that you don't necessarily have to pay, but who are willing to give you expertise, I think that's another great way to get added advantage. And you'd be very, very surprised. Once you go to somebody and you say, we're setting up a startup company, they will be very, very generous with their time and with their advice. So I think that's a very important lesson to learn early on, is just simply do not be afraid to ask questions. The other piece of advice I would give people is use every single opportunity as a networking opportunity. From dropping your children off in daycare and you meet somebody and you get into a conversation, you could suddenly discover that they are working on the finance team in a company that you had never even thought of as a potential customer, or they could be somebody who's got software skills and is willing to help you in the evening. So unusual places, dropping kids at childcare. I don't know, you might bump into an old friend who was a school colleague that you haven't seen for years, but use every opportunity you can as a potential way to increase your network of people. And also, and this is particular, I suppose, to maybe people who are still early in their careers, who are at university, try and get training where possible in things like entrepreneurship. We were lucky in our early stage of our journey that the funding agency in Ireland, Science Foundation Ireland, funded a couple of us to go to the US, to Boston, to do the NSF iCorps business generation program. And the real message around that particular trainee program was it's very important to interview at least 100 potential customers in the initial stage of your business, because you think you know what the customer wants, but you don't. Only the customer knows. So make sure you talk to the customers early on. So there are a few additional bits of advice.
Cool, thank you, Sally. What I would just like to double stress here is like, yeah, you never know where you build your next network. I built a network exactly over Christmas, over the holiday, the birthday of my son, and we went to a birthday party, and then there was somebody else, and now we wrote $1 million grant about something, about a business idea with them. So you never really know where you actually meet people who can help you out. So be open about this. I think that's really important. And this networking in any weird locations ever, like as a trampoline and a children's birthday. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say, I'd like to say one thing about imposter syndrome. So a lot of people are like, I can't do this. You know, one thing that scientists are good at is learning new stuff. And so, you know, you should not be terrified. If you are passionate, as has been mentioned, you can do this. I totally agree. You can do it with help because you are smart about learning stuff from people who already know stuff. The best entrepreneurs do not go it alone. They go it with getting advice from people who have crossed the same path, but then are still able to use their own knowledge to make decisions. Like when I was interviewing for Adgene, they asked me to, you know, they gave me under confidentiality the organization's balance sheet and said, oh, we'll talk about that at the interview. And I was completely panicked. I had never read a balance sheet. Like, how was that going to work for me? I am not a business person. I am a geneticist, right? So I went to my sister-in-law, who's a partner in a consulting firm, and spent 2 hours with her while she walked me through the balance sheet. So I would sound at least conversant enough to be able to say, I don't know a lot about balance sheet, but I can tell you this. And she even gave me one very good question to ask, which was sort of a thank goodness I asked that question, because it probably helped me get the job. So, you know, be bold. You can learn. And I think, you know, surrounding yourself with people that are good at the things you're not good at is the pleasure of startup world, I think. And so, yeah, don't worry. Like, don't say, oh, I'm not smart enough to do this. I don't know anything about it. That's the fun part, is learning it on the way.
So yeah, you actually kind of preempted the questions from the audience here, but I'm gonna post it anyway, which was, I mean, like, what are the most useful skills you can transfer from academia, and what are the skills or the attitudes that maybe stand in the way? So you already mentioned like one of the skills that, yeah, you're a really good learner, and the other thing was like, you have to overcome your imposter syndrome because you have to sell something like all the time, really. So what do other people think? Like, what are the useful skills you can transfer out of academia, and what are maybe attitudes which stand in the way being successful in startups? Any takers?
Well, I know what the biggest one is, and it's resilience. Anybody who's run a gel 50 times to get it to work knows what the startup world is like, because you can knock on 100 doors and it'll be the 101st that gives you what you need. I don't know about you guys, but you got to have a backbone for this work, but it's rewarding.
Yeah, and I was going to say also to be to not rely on sort of outside validation to be sort of because you will get a lot, like it'll be depressing, you'll get a lot of bad news. I mean, it's kind of all part of the resilience sort of package, but that's the idea. You have to be sort of self-motivated, and because especially like once you're successful and once you're big and once things are moving, then everybody supports you. But in the beginning, people are skeptical or not quite sure, especially when you're coming out of academia. Like all your professors and stuff, like they were like, I don't know, and it's you have the feeling that if it goes south, they're gonna like pretend like they never knew you, and so you have to be like, you have to be your own light to some extent, and overcoming imposter syndrome and resilience and grit. These are all important parts of that.
Thank you. Nick, do you have something to add from like an employee perspective? What actually was
yeah, I think one of the most literal things that translates is we can hear me. Yes, definitely project management, time management. You're going to be doing a lot of different projects, maybe not even in the same vein. And so how, at least at the PhD level, that's basically out of necessity. You need to be able to stagger things and get them going along just like you do in academia. I think maybe this is different. Maybe it's the same. Don't get too tied to any one particular small project, because it could go in the trash pretty quickly based on evidence from something, and that's just something you have to do. And right, I guess that's also kind of a part of resiliency, is where even though you really liked what you were going down, you have to get rid of it and move on to something that's going to be the right path to go, especially yeah, if all the evidence the evidence points objectively to you being wrong. And I also actually wanted to touch back on the networking perspective. What we were talking about earlier, I didn't get to say this, and maybe this is painfully obvious, but don't stop going to conferences. Conferences have helped us recruit, get funding and network and all of those other kinds of things. And also, of course, learn about the other technologies. And that's all I have to say about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess one other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
One other thing I could add is, if you are thinking about a startup, it's worth taking a little time to think about the culture that you want to create, because people don't leave jobs; they leave bosses. And so, if you're a jerk, you're not going to attract good people and keep them. And turnover is really hard on a small organization. If people leave because you treat them poorly, or because they're not inclusive and they feel like they're an outsider, which can happen if you're biased, you don't have your biases in check, I would say that the resources to replace people are very, very hard when you are small. And so when you reach that 10 already, 5, 10 people, you should be thinking about diversity, inclusion, HR resources, because you're not an HR professional and you're not going to be one. So you need to get that advice from outside your organization. I think probably the first thing I did when I got to Agene is hire an HR person, even though we were only like 18 people. But we needed someone to pay attention to those things. And anyone who follows me knows I talk a lot about how important culture is. Happier people can work harder and do better. There's just no question. If you beat them down and make them miserable, they will not give you the energy that you need for something as fast-paced as a startup.
I agree.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. Happier people, nicer and happier. It's a good thing. So kind of touching on this, which we talked just this morning, which also came out from a question again. So some people working in startups this morning mentioned, well, wherever you are really, about it being kind of more rewarding because you get more of the credit sometimes. Well, in academia, you kind of like a name on a list somewhere, like, and your boss might actually not mention you while he talks about your work. So like, what is the really other rewarding things you got out of a startup compared to academia, and what are the things which were like the hardest challenges?
I can jump in. So the most rewarding thing is you're closer to impact. So in academia, you know, you can have the greatest idea, you can, you know, then 2 years later your paper comes out, maybe like 3 people start doing it, you know. It's hard to really get people to do stuff. And so whereas now, you know, like our tech was very esoteric, and now there's like hundreds and hundreds of these things all over the place, and so seeing your technology actually impact people's lives, you know, like people are doing research with it, people are publishing papers like, you know, Ben himself, you know, you guys have used our stuff for some things, right? Published it. Like, that's amazing for me to say like that our thing is actually useful to someone else, and in a relatively short period of time we can see that impact happening. So that's really been amazing. As for challenges, one of the things that for me was the hardest was to get to this idea of like marketing and PR. Like that was my opposite element. Like it was super hard for me to be okay with it. like people, like, you know, obviously you have to like sell stuff, and it's super important. And I was just like super anti it, and I was like, we're scientists, it's all about the data, it's all about, you know, but really learning how to get the message out and how to become visible and how to get people to know you, like it's super important. I think there comes a time in every company's like size of proportion where like this is a sad thing to say as a scientist, where like sales and marketing becomes more important than like the science stuff. Like you have to have good product, but at some point the driving engine becomes, you know, you start moving the product. So like that's something that I think a lot of science folks struggle with. I was one of them. I'm coming around a little bit, but definitely just like, you know, like writing an article on LinkedIn was just like the worst for me for a long time. I just couldn't deal with it. And, you know, little by little, we're kind of learning to overcome that.
Does anybody else want to pick this up, or should we move on to the next one? Sally? Yeah, your microphone.
Sally, you're on mute.
Yeah. Still not working. All right.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, that looks good.
I got you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. One of the big challenges that we had initially, and I don't think we've really talked about it today, is cash flow. There were some months when we had like €5 in the bank account. We didn't know how we were going to pay our employees. And certainly, I suppose, having come from a science background where, you know, you maybe had research in the grants in the bank account, it was a little bit different. So having to deal in a sort of an immediate way with cash flow scenarios, because companies that you've invoiced 3 months ago haven't paid, but yet you have to pay the employees at the end of the month. That actually, I think, was probably one of the biggest challenges that I found we had to deal with in the beginning. And again, it's a time when you should ideally have good people to talk to. Go and have a very friendly conversation with your bank manager. I would recommend actually having a good rapport with your bank manager initially, having conversations when you set up those bank accounts, first of all, maybe reporting into them every 3 months or so, letting them know how things are going. Because if you do have a difficult period and you've got a history and a rapport with your bank manager, there's a much better chance that it might give you a little bit of a loan to tide you over until the next invoice is paid. So do think about cash flow, because that will have a very serious impact, I suppose, on the sustainability of the business into the future.
Cool. Yeah, that actually leads me into maybe my second last question. We'll see how we go. So, like what is people's pathway to actually to sustainability? So, like, it's great to actually get a startup running after a while, but like, what is the actually sustainability model, and how are you going to achieve this? Also, considering what one person mentioned, that most startups actually go bust after some time.
Joanne,
So
most startups do. Yeah, most startups do go bust. So, you know, take a deep breath and embrace that. But the learning, you know, outside of academia, people change jobs every 3 to 6 years anyway. So just, you know, that's okay. So I guess I would say, you know, it's the learning along the way and the continuing to network and continuing to keep opportunities open. So I sort of never stop talking with people about what's going on in the city, even though I'm quite happy in my position, because you never know where things will lead, I would say. So I think that's part of the resilience. The new challenge is exciting. Going to a new company is exciting. Not that you want your company to fail, of course, you put your heart into it, but not every idea is good, and there isn't money for everything, you know? And I think the more that you learn about that, I will say that I was in large pharma and in startup, and those were both awesome experiences. And if you know the right people, you can move back and forth. The resources in a large company are just different. And you can focus on different things and different learnings, and there's knowledge there that you can bring to startup land that's super helpful. So having been in a big company, it was much easier for me to pitch from a small company because I had been on the buy side, you know. So that was a really valuable experience. So diversity, I think, in your career, all those experiences are going to feed into an opportunity. The other thing about a small company is if it is going to go belly up, you usually know earlier. So like a big company everybody's job is at risk. Don't think that any job is more secure. A big company can have a layoff. You can be fantastic and your function can be eliminated. It happens, you know. But in a small company, you have a little bit more control. Like we knew it was coming. We knew that, you know, we basically laid ourselves off because we knew all the money and research was going to go into development of a drug product. And so there's a little bit more of control there, I would say, so that you can start planning earlier and quietly, you know, looking around for what the next thing is. I don't know. I'm not in the thick of that anymore. Maybe you guys who are earlier can speak to it better than I can.
Yeah, I think for us, we've actually had that very open and honest conversation about what happens afterwards. But when it was just two of us, we came to the conclusion that it's not so scary because we've already done the customer interviews or networking with the people who were involved with the same industry anyway. So there was plenty of opportunity and already an established network with you know, who you can be employed by or even maybe do another startup with potentially because you've inherently already done that. So yeah, it's not such a scary aspect. I think that most companies go belly up. So that was the conversation we both had.
Yeah, so I think most of my comments will mirror the others. One of the early pieces of advice I got was that, hey, you know, most startups go down, and nobody thinks their startup is going to go down when they're starting. So just put yourself in a position where you you maximize how much you learn, because you know if you do, then the learning stays with you, right? But also what Sally said, yeah, cash flow is like super important. People don't understand, but like companies who are successful go out of business because of cash flow issues, because as you grow, the cash in the bank swings get bigger and bigger too, and so you can be doing swimmingly on your income statement, and then you run out of money and you have to fire everybody, which seems counterintuitive. But so yeah, so try to diversify where you get your money from. Look at you know, whatever you need, like you know, obviously customer revenue is important, but it can be super peaky because yeah, like universities sometimes will be like, we only pay on the 25th of the month, and if you've missed the 25th, you're not getting paid for another month, right? Grants are another one, because at least with a grant, like if you do get one, you gotta like know how much you have, like if there's a certainty there that is very useful. You know, investors, you know, there's like if you don't, you know, there's different philosophies on how hard to hit the investment. But you know, at some point, I even just had like advisors and friends when I was freaking out when we had very little money in the bank. They like at some point they just had to be like, listen, like I'll lend you money if things get super bad, like I will like rescue you. So even stuff like that, like not formal bank relationships. Obviously, like if you have like it's useful to have like a credit line for emergencies, right? But even things like you have friends kind of, you know, help you out if you need it. So so just try to diversify that basket of where the money's coming from in case one goes bad. You have others to sort of rely on if you can.
Cool. This brings us to an end because we're just on the hour. So first of all, I would like to thank everybody, like Sally, Nick, Ivan, and Joanne, to taking the time to talk with us. I think that was really exciting, and actually I learned a lot, and I hopefully all of our listeners too. So this will be also available as a recording later on YouTube and the channel. So what I got out of this is like it's really about talking with people, and it will be a really learning intensive period, but you also have to listen to mentors and customers to really generate a certain value for a market. But the resilience you actually get out of academia will be very, very useful actually to succeed in entrepreneurship. But part of succeeding is failing, and so it's most important is what you actually learn along the way. So thank you very much for this. Our next ECR Wednesday webinar will be about transforming data visualization to improve transparency and reproducibility. This will be at the 30th of October. And for now, I would like to thank everybody on this webinar and all our panelists. Thank you very much, and maybe hope to see you again next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.